And the formula continues for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Get turnovers and get wins. 6 straight this season, 12 straight nationally over the past 2 seasons. Quite the run by the Iowa Hawkeyes. And, of course, the latest, maybe the most important, defeating Penn State, coming back from 2 touchdowns down to win it 23-20. We're going to talk Iowa football for the next hour. We got Corey Brad on the line from the Hawkeye of the Storm. You got to check him out on YouTube. So go to the YouTube channel right here in the search. Go to From the Hawkeye of the Storm, and also right here, the Voice of College Football on our Iowa channel. And I want to thank everyone out there who has locked in to our recent Iowa coverage with Corey here at the Voice of College Football. Hey, Corey, how are you?
Doing good, Mark. We can finally talk about more football this Saturday because most of the talk this week has been about just stupidity after that Penn State game. And, I took part in it. I did record, I meant to record my podcast from the Hawkeye of the Storm Wednesday and releasing later Wednesday evening. Didn't get that recorded until today. There was kind of some extra information I wanted to throw in, some recruiting news this week. And so anyways, I'm excited to talk about Purdue. I do want to spend some time. I think we'll talk a little bit about the Penn State game, Mark, but I'm excited to turn the page.
Yeah, let's go chronologically. So Penn State, of course, that was the game of the week in the Big Ten and nationally, 3-4 going at it. And I got to say, from a schematic standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, and certainly from a style of play narrative, it turned out to be the game I think we all expected it to be. 23-20, had we selected from a multiple choice before the game was played, might have been the most popular selection, because that was about right in the ballpark of what this looked like going into it. Your evaluation of the Hawkeyes play on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, I think I projected 29-24, but that certainly doesn't make me some savant. A lot of people projected in the 20s or maybe even low 30s, but mostly in the 20s. We talked about it. Don and I want to say hi to Hawkeye Howard. I see he's on here. He's one of our loyal listeners. I see he's heading out to work, so drive safe, Hawkeye Howard. But a lot of takeaways from the game on Saturday, Mark. Obviously, the biggest storyline heading out of the game, unfortunately, was the injury of Sean Clifford. And that seems to be what everybody wants to talk about. And that's great. I mean, or I shouldn't say it's great. It's too bad. But, I think some of it's kind of taken away from what Iowa did. I mean, let's keep in mind that Iowa's offense strung together a couple of huge plays in this game, which I said going into the game, Penn State-Iowa games typically come down to who has a big play at the right time. I flash back to 2009 with Adrian Claiborne punt in Happy Valley. Turned for a touchdown. That kind of ended up being the difference. Of course, Iowa tacked on some late scores in that game, but that's just kind of what Penn State games are like for Iowa fans. 2017, same thing. Penn State capitalizes on a late drive. Juwan Johnson on the final play of the game, and that was the difference. We saw that on Saturday, the big pass. Beautiful call, by the way, to Brian Ferentz. I was a bit critical of Brian and how he called the game on Saturday, simply because it was, I have problems with Brian in short yardage situations, especially on critical downs. It was 3rd down and 2, 3rd down and 3, and Brian was calling passes out of the shotgun. Iowa averages seems like 3 yards or even 4 at times on QB sneaks. I don't think we should be doing anything other than QB sneaks, at least being under center and giving the illusion that we're going to run a QB sneak or at least a fullback dive, something like that. But anyways, he got the job done. Huge call to Nico Reganey late in that game. The QB boot right, and then, of course, the throw left, the misdirection, and Nico ran a beautiful route. Great catch, good throw. And that was basically the ball game, because Iowa's defense pretty much shut Penn State down after that. I think the bottom line is we don't know what would have happened if Clifford had stayed in the game. I see a comment here. Ed Rogers says they were headed to 40. Does anybody, I don't know if Ed's joking, but Mark, do you really believe, anybody who's got any knowledge of Iowa football and how Phil Parker coaches defenses and how his games typically go for the defense, does anybody believe that Sean Clifford was going to score 40 points against Iowa's defense on Saturday? That's ludicrous. It's totally ludicrous, Mark.
So you made the comment a couple of weeks ago, Corey, in kind of a self-analysis of your approach to broadcasting and the analysis of the games, that you try to cut it straight and give an unbiased view, but you realize that you're going to lean on Iowa's side from a rooting standpoint, and it's just in your DNA. Similar to me. That's my approach, to try to cut it as straight as possible and be neutral, but not ignoring the fact that it's in my DNA, my rooting interest. So what I'll say about that is I can understand both fan bases defending their points of view in regards to a win is a win. You play the players you have. Injuries are part of the game. We won fair and square. We had no controversial calls, nothing like that. Iowa won the football game. Okay. On the Penn State side, there was a marked difference between the level of offensive play with Sean Clifford versus Taquan Roberson. That was obvious.
Yeah.
Now you could look across the conference and the nation and see backup quarterback situations in which the backup is better prepared for that situation. I put that to a certain extent on James Franklin in Penn State. That young man was not prepared for that stage or that moment. And I know that's difficult to do, but he just really couldn't run the offense. And again, I see other situations like that where the backup quarterback is a downgrade to a certain extent, but able to operate the offense. So I can see the estimation that either Penn State fans would make or just college football fans in general to say, okay, you can't argue with the result of the game. It goes right in the standings. It is what it is. And in no way should Iowa be held accountable or responsible for other teams' excuses or injuries. But on the Penn State side, that you would say, okay, we still believe we're a better team. We were on the road. We were, I don't want to say dominating the game, controlling the game. We were outplaying Iowa on the stat sheet. We lost our starting quarterback. We weren't the same.
Yeah. I have no problem with that discussion. I have no problem with a Penn State fan saying, I think we would have won. But what bothers me is when you say we would have won the game, or, we would have scored this many points. Iowa hasn't given. Do you realize that people need to realize this? If you're not an Iowa fan, Iowa has held opponents to under 25 points in 28 ball games straight. Okay. That's a ridiculous stat. Now, you can say, well, I don't play in the East. They play in the West. There's not a whole lot of offense in the West. They did play USC a couple years ago. Now, I know USC's down, but going into that game, we're really talking about USC's high-powered offense against Iowa's, defense. And, of course, Iowa's offense ended up looking pretty darn good in that game. They played Penn State last year. I get it. That was before Penn State went on their run. But the bottom line is they've held 28 straight teams to 24 points or less. And by the way, I just want to say this. I'm sort of trolling Penn State by wearing the blue and white today, but I'm mainly, this is why I'm wearing the blue and white, Mark. This is a tribute to Mike Stoops, right? Kentucky. These are Kentucky colors this evening, because let's remember where Penn State's backup quarterback transferred to. Will Levis is the starter at Kentucky. So had Will Levis played in this game on Saturday, who knows? Obviously more adequate than Roberson at this stage in his career. And so that was a killer. That was a huge part. And I agree with you, Mark. It's not only can you, maybe 10 years ago, you can make the argument that, a coach can't do a whole lot if he doesn't have a great backup, especially at a developmental school like Iowa. It just is what it is. You're not going to have guys sticking around. But with Penn State in the era of the transfer portal, I get it's hard to recruit a backup, but in the era of the transfer portal, they lost out on a good backup quarterback during the offseason by losing Levis. So that's on Franklin, and it's also on Penn State's offensive line / running back, fullback, whoever they want to deploy to protect Clifford on that play, because it was a clean hit by Iowa linebacker Jack Campbell that took Clifford out of the game. It was a perfect hit. It was a clean hit. And again, protect your quarterback better is what I would give as far as advice to Penn State fans. There is no asterisk as it relates to this game. There's no question Clifford being out was a big storyline, but there's no asterisk in this game. I hope that the committee, that's the other. I shouldn't say fear. I'm not having this fear yet. We're 6 games in. Iowa's undefeated, but I'm envisioning a scenario, Mark, and we can talk about this maybe later in the show. I'm envisioning a scenario where Iowa ends up 12-0 in the regular season, loses in the championship game to Ohio State potentially. Are they in? And the committee's going to start looking at this West Division and saying the West Division was way down this year. The Big Ten's strong, but let's be frank. Iowa plays 2/3 of its games in the West, and their East ballot was not the strongest, with an Indiana team that we thought was going to be really good and is down, a Maryland team that probably isn't as good as we thought. Penn State, they won that because of Clifford going. I'm just envisioning a scenario where the committee punishes Iowa for a number of things, and this ending up being kind of a negative mark. I hope that's not the case, because it shouldn't be. I guess maybe let's get your thoughts on that, Mark, before we move on. Could that come back to bite Iowa?
So when we look at the Western Division, you're drawing that conclusion, and I think it's a valid one for these reasons. Number one, there's not a running mate for Iowa. There's not a Wisconsin that is a top 15 to 20 team in the nation to say, hey, there's stiff competition, or at least one deciding game in the division that you can say, okay, they knocked off Wisconsin, and Wisconsin finished 9-3, 10-2. Number one. Number two, they're at last I counted, I don't know if it held up after last weekend, Iowa has the only wins in the Western Division against the East.
That did hold up.
3-0.
They're 3-0. Now, a lot of the West teams haven't played their East opponents yet. I'll admit that. So
I think it's up to 6 is the count for the East victories against the West. I did that math in my head the other day.
But think about that. 6 combined is not. I mean, that just shows there's a lot of games still to be played. Yes. So maybe the West can even things out a little bit. But you can't take away the fact that Iowa is 3-0. Whether you want to downplay Maryland and Indiana, it's not Iowa's fault that. I mean, I feel like we're having the same gosh darn conversation that we had in 2015. It's not Iowa's fault that Indiana is not what we thought they would be, and it's not Iowa's fault that Maryland, is probably not. I hope Maryland can recover, but the East is just so strong. I don't know how they do.
I'm torn on that argument in terms of we can't hold that against a team. Well, yeah, they didn't create the schedule. They did not schedule the games. We cannot hold it against them in regards to blaming them. They only have control of the out-of-conference schedule. But we have to evaluate the schedules. That's what's done in selecting college football playoff teams.
Yeah, that's true. But I will say this: what I want to say sour about, but what plays in the back of my mind is the Colin Cowherd narrative, and it wasn't just Cowherd that said it back in 2015, criticizing Iowa's schedule. So there is a difference now, because in 2015, Mark, the Big Ten was still playing 8 conference games. So Pittsburgh was that other Power 5 team at home. So that wasn't a great home schedule, and Iowa won by merits of a 57-yard field goal from Marshall Kane in that one. So, that's a positive that you can't play on that. And you're right, the rest of the schedule they don't make up. But I just think, the good news is for Iowa, you got a great win at Iowa State. I still think Iowa State is going to be there in the Big 12 at the end when all is said and done. And if you're an Iowa fan, and if you have any hopes of the playoff, you need to start rooting hard for the Cyclones. I know a lot of Iowa fans have problems doing that, but that's the reality of it. If Iowa State can go out there and still win double-digit games this year, that would be huge for this. Because, again, going on the road and winning that game, doesn't matter if it was in September or not, is huge. Maryland is another rooting interest. There's no reason not to root for Maryland right now. Obviously, Indiana, although Indiana, boy, down Penix now, I just – that's almost like it's just a tailspin right now for the Hoosiers. So, we'll see what happens, but I think, I do wonder if the Penn State game, because you have humans that are making up this committee, if we get to a point where the playoff is a real discussion. I think it becomes a valid one now. I said that last week. If they beat Penn State, I'd start talking about it more. But in 5-6 weeks, I just wonder if this Penn State game, how the committee will weigh it.
You're making my argument that I wield all year long in regards to tear up this committee and throw them away.
Yeah.
All right. So those are the rooting points that the Iowa fan needs to take. Let's make a reasonable expectation of the best wins on the Iowa schedule. And let's say they are 12-0, and let's project a conference championship game loss in respectable fashion, a 7 to 10 point loss to whomever. All right. So Penn State's going to be a 10-2 football team.
That's
Is that
fair.
reasonable? So
Yeah.
they're a fringe top 10 team in the country. Iowa State makes it to the Big 12 championship game, possibly loses, let's say. That's their second loss. They go 11-2. They're a fringe top 10 team in the country. There needs to be somebody, hopefully, to emerge in the Western Division as a top 25 team, as a 8-4 team. Maybe Wisconsin, I think, is still a candidate. And whether that's Minnesota, whomever that is, to get to that point.
Well, I was just going to say real quick, if Iowa State, not to correct you here, Mark, but if Iowa State lost to Oklahoma in the title game, that'd be 3 losses for them since they already
They've
dropped
already
one to
lost.
Baylor.
Yeah, Iowa,
So
Baylor. Okay.
It's
So
going to be tough.
10-3. They're still a fringe top 10 team.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know. Wisconsin looked good against Illinois, but I mean, are we going to really read into that? I mean, I read into Maryland looking good against Kent State. And I don't know. Maryland looked good against Purdue. And that's a Purdue team that kind of scares me this week, is just because of who they have, their skill position players. But yeah, Wisconsin's probably the best win. I don't want Nebraska to get good, but they seem to be getting good without winning. And that's not what you want either, necessarily, because obviously you're competing against them in the West. But let's be honest, Nebraska's not winning the West with as many losses as they're racking up now. So the problem is now, if they continue to lose games and they end up at 5-7 and they knock off Iowa, or I say Iowa beats them, that doesn't, even though I think you and I probably both agree that they're probably in the top 3 of the West right now, is if you had to project forward. The problem is it's not going to, again, because you have humans looking at these things. Now, the computers would look at it that way too, probably, if you're looking at just strictly wins and losses. But because humans are looking at this and they're like, oh, it's Nebraska, it's the same old, same old. They're a dangerous team. So they're probably, I mean, Wisconsin's the scariest game, if you want to talk about games that are scary on Iowa's schedule, because it's on the road at Madison. And I don't know, how many rushing yards did Wisconsin get this last week against Illinois? It was some absurd number.
Their total number, the total offense, I've got this drilled into my head because I did a Big Ten power rankings. They outgained Illinois 5-1. It was like 493-93 or 491-93, something in that range.
See, that's gaudy. That's ridiculous. I don't want to just discredit them because it was against Illinois, because that's what they did. That's what they did in the Jonathan Taylor era. Like, they just racked up ridiculous number of yards against teams.
And I don't discredit it when you can say, okay, other teams are not doing that. Other quality teams are not doing that.
Yeah.
So we have yet to really see that completely play out. But Illinois has played some other games, of course, in the Big Ten against okay competition. And obviously, they haven't been dominated like that.
No, but they did lose to UTSA and were struggling against Charlotte for a while. I mean, it's not a good Illinois team, so I don't want to just act like Wisconsin's back. But we know that Wisconsin's defense has never left. I mean, that defense is really good. And so, just like, I make the comparison, just like Iowa's defense is going to keep them in every game this year. That's why I don't buy this narrative that Penn State was just going to run away with the Iowa game. Wisconsin's going to keep them in every game, as long as Graham Mertz doesn't throw a bunch of interceptions, which he very well could against Iowa. So that's obviously a tough game. I mean, let's keep in mind, Iowa hasn't won at Madison since, I think it was 2000. 2009, I think they won at Madison. Well, they won in 2015, with the exception of that 2015 game, of course. But they haven't won at Madison since 2009. Now, they really haven't beat Wisconsin at home either in that time period. So there's just no reason to look past Wisconsin. There's also no reason to look past Purdue, because Jeff Brom has beaten Kirk Ferentz 3 of the 4 years they've played. One more thing to add before we move on from the Clifford injury, Mark. I just thought of this because we were talking about it. And I talk about it during my podcast this week, which again will be released on my channel later this week, or later this evening. Is there's this feeling that people think that it was going to be a runaway because it was 17-3 when Clifford got knocked out. It was 17-10 when Roberson came in the game for the first time. Yes, it was 17. It was third down. It was 14-3 in Iowa territory. It was third down. Campbell hits Clifford. Pass is incomplete. They kick a field goal. It's 17-3 after the field goal. But then Iowa's offense drove like 70-some yards against the Penn State D, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Clifford doesn't play defense. they score, it's 17-10. So it was a one-score game. So it's just, to me, it's ridiculous to think that they were just destroying Iowa. And they did pick off Clifford twice in that short time period when he played in the game. So anyways, just wanted to add that in. And Mark, before we move on from Penn State, can we talk a little bit about our the claims this week that have circulated between Kirk Ferentz and James Franklin?
Absolutely. While we're on this playoff conversation, I'd like to pick up this comment that's right here, and then we'll get on to the Penn State injury controversy, because I like to try to keep up with the chat, and we get woefully behind, but it's impossible. So everyone, we appreciate your comments and your questions, but for obviously Corey and I to have dialogue, it's nearly impossible for me to keep up in the chat and keep these rolling, but you've got some great comments here. I'm just intrigued by these scenarios. So you got Scott chiming in with, in crazy land, but if Kentucky beats Georgia and Iowa and Cincinnati both win, does the AP have the integrity to put Iowa and Cincinnati 1 and 2? All right, Scott, if I must, and if I'm allowed to go first here, Corey, on this one, I know who's going to be my number one team in the country, and you've missed somebody extremely obvious there, Scott. You've got Kentucky at 7-0, and they had just defeated Georgia, who is the most dominant team in the country.
Okay.
There's your number one team in the country, in my book.
That's a good point. Yeah. But now, as far as the AP functions, we know they function a lot differently, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah. You get your spot and you don't lose it. Yeah, it's not a resume ranking. It's if you beat somebody else to the punch and get to that spot, then you generally don't lose your spot in line.
But it's absurd. I think if you're projecting forward, if Kentucky beats Georgia, the AP will rank Iowa as number 1 and Cincinnati as number 2. Don't you think, Mark? I mean, I don't know how you don't, assuming, because that's question's
insane,
not that.
Though.
Well, yeah,
especially Cincinnati, not necessarily Iowa. There's a case to be made for Iowa with the Penn State and Iowa State wins.
Well, that's why I think Cincinnati's probably going to be in the playoff. The thing about it is I don't want Cincinnati making the playoff would be great for college football. I agree with that, because you finally have a group of 5 team make it. But the issue becomes they don't play anybody the rest of the way.
It's awful.
And so it's just hard. If you're an Iowa fan, you should probably root against Cincinnati, because you're rooting against everybody who has any chance of beating you out for a playoff spot. But I do think if Kentucky were to beat Georgia, which I don't think is that crazy. I mean, I don't know what your projections on that game are. Of course, you're not going to give them away because you got your Patreon page, Mark, and that's fair. But I guess my point is Kentucky could beat Georgia. They're looking good right now. I don't know that Will Levis, I think he might get eaten alive by that Georgia defense. I'm no SEC expert. That's just my take. I'd love to see Kentucky win it. Again, I'm sporting my Kentucky shirt here. But yeah, I think Iowa and Cincinnati will be number 1 and number 2, just given the fact that they're 2 and 3 this week.
Corey, though, on the case of Cincinnati, we can't blame them for their schedule.
You're right. No, you're absolutely right. Now the difference.
I don't want to be right. No, they need to be held accountable for the schedule.
The difference is, and here's me being a homer. The difference is Iowa does play in maybe the strongest conference in the country.
Absolutely.
That's debatable, I guess, by some, but the difference is Cincinnati does not. And so, this is an off year for the West. It's not an off year for the American. It's just what they are. Now, Cincinnati will, get to the Big 12 next year, and hopefully that conference can stay relevant. I think they probably will. We've had those debates before, but anyways, yeah. I mean, there's no question about it. If Cincinnati and Iowa win, in my mind, if Kentucky beats Georgia, they're Iowa and Cincinnati are number 1 and number 2, respectively.
And our guy Jordan makes a good point. Do we really care if the AP has integrity? Of course, this all falls in the lap of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, and they have ultimate say. And the rankings, mine, the APs, the coaches, whomever else you follow online, get thrown to the wayside very quickly here. And the last point I will make about Iowa's schedule and their resume, if they get to a championship game and lose, I think that puts them, yes, as you tabled the discussion, in a very vulnerable position. But I have no doubt that having been left out of the playoffs, let's say under those circumstances, they will have had a better resume than teams in the past that have made the playoffs. But those teams won a conference championship, and I'm looking directly at Clemson when I make that statement.
So say that first part again, Mark.
If Iowa misses the playoffs, is left out of the
Yeah.
playoffs under the circumstance in which they go 12-0 and lose the conference championship game,
Okay.
they will have delivered a better resume, in my estimation, than teams that have been selected for the playoffs during these 7 previous years. Clemson, in particular, playing in a weak ACC, but as the champion of the conference.
Yeah, I agree with you about resume, but I agree with you about resume. I should just leave it at that. I do question not only do I question the AP voters, I question the committee on if they have the right criteria, whatever their criteria is in the back of their minds, if it's going to fit in line with what we believe to be the correct criteria, which is resume. Because I still think, say Alabama lose. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but again, say Alabama goes and loses. I mean, this is all what if, Mark. But if Alabama goes and wins the rest of their games and then loses a tight one in the SEC title game to Georgia, and they've got 2 losses, and Iowa loses a tight one to Ohio State with 1 loss, that's going to be a huge debate. I mean, people are going to be saying that Alabama should make it in over Iowa. I just don't believe that to be true. I just don't. Again, Jimmy's and Joe's, I get it that Alabama's probably up from 1 to 100 or 1 to 99 are certainly better than Iowa's. But again, if we're talking resume, Iowa will have a better resume. I mean, and Alabama, let's remember, that loss to Texas A&M, that's not a great loss, is it? I mean, Texas A&M's not looked great.
Not as it stands right now. It's a Texas A&M team that narrowly escaped at Colorado, a marginal at best team. I'm being kind, 10-7. Control dominated at the line of scrimmage against Arkansas, lost a close game against a marginal, I will rate them better than that, a top 30 to 35 team in the country in Mississippi State. Arkansas, I think, is pretty legit, top 15 to 20, something in that range, but they were really never in that game. So Texas A&M out of nowhere notches this enormous win, but look at the AP. It's all opinion based. They dropped Alabama all the way to number 5.
I know. It's ridiculous. So in other words, they basically say, well, Alabama can win the rest of their games, and they're basically guaranteed in, right? Because somebody ahead of them is going to lose at some point, Mark. And you keep your place in line no matter what you do, as long as you win games. So, like it or not, that's just how it is. I've come to the conclusion that Alabama's got to lose twice for them to not make it. Cincinnati has to lose again. Or they just have to lose, right? They haven't lost yet. They've got to lose not to get in. And that's why under this criteria, I think we have to have playoff expansion, because it could work with 4 teams, but not with the way the committee ranks teams. And again, we're looking at AP poll. I get that these are not college football playoff rankings, but I have a feeling that the playoff rankings will probably line up. Hopefully they don't, but I have a feeling they'll line up for the most part with these AP voters.
Corey, the more and more we have these kind of conversations and others involving college football metrics and so forth, the more you will hear me say this. I wish somebody would do this. I wish they would compile this. And based on what you just stated, it's that somebody would track through the playoff era how closely the AP and the coaches poll align with the college football playoff committee's selections once they make them. I would like to know that.
Yeah, that's a lot of work that I wish I have this all the time with Don Patterson, because he tracks everything, and he's a retired guy, and he does analytics for Kirk. So I get he loves it, and I just can't get into numbers as much as he does. And I know you're into numbers more than I am too, Mark. But I like it when Pro Football Focus and these other.
Yeah, I want somebody else to do it. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
That's like, I want to be able to look at recruiting rankings 5 years later, and I want the classes re-ranked.
Yeah.
I want them to evaluate all the players based on their college careers and how they produced, and then re-rank all the classes for us.
Well, I think that's part of the reason Pro Football Focus is so popular. It's part of the reason why guys like Ken Pomeroy have done so well in basketball, because that guy was, my understanding of Ken Pomeroy is he basically started from scratch, and now people quote him and cite him all the time. So anyways, I know we're going off on a tangent, but I absolutely agree with you on the numbers.
Yeah, I'm going to come up with a metric, and that'll get me on the map. Maybe we'll do that. So real talk, I wish you were right that it would be that cut and dry for everyone. And the committee, we're speaking of the committee here in that selection of Iowa over Alabama as a one-loss team versus the two-loss team, and neither a conference champion. But all right, let's get to the controversy of the week following the big matchup and win against Penn State. And that, of course, the faking possibly of injuries by Penn State. And this is a controversy across college football, but it was very concentrated in this particular game because of the magnitude of the game and the number of injuries or so-called injuries that Penn State, I guess it just hit that sideline, that side of the field. So Corey, I will let you take it from there in regards to what was stated back and forth between the two head coaches.
Well, I won't totally go off. If people want to hear me go off about this, they can listen to my podcast later tonight. But the bottom line is, and this is information that Coach John Patterson tracked for us, because again, this is he's dedicated. 6 injury timeouts for Penn State during this game, 5 of which were on the defensive end. Okay, now that could be a coincidence, but obviously, if you're deliberately taking a dive, you're not going to do it for your offense, right? Now, James Franklin was talking about PJ Mustipher and basically defending, because I think if you're an Iowa fan, you heard Kirk earlier this week address this fan base booing the injured players and basically said, well, the Iowa fans aren't stupid. They thought they smelled a rat. And of course that blows up. And then James Franklin comes out the next day and goes on a 5-minute rant where he literally brings out a sheet of paper and has notes written down, all these points as to why the claim is ludicrous. And I'll just be honest, we don't know for sure. We'll never know for sure. And it doesn't really matter. I want to move on after this little segment. But the bottom line is, to me, there's a couple things that incriminate you. One, when you get that defensive and spend 5 minutes running over some notes. I mean, if Franklin, if there was nothing behind those claims, Mark, would James Franklin have spent that much time compiling all these reasons why? I mean, he would never attack Kirk no, he's actually defending and saying, well, no, this is why we wouldn't do that. This is why we didn't do that. Or how could that be true? Like, it's like, I equate it to, a child. When a child is accused by his parent of doing something, he's going to throw everybody else under the bus. He's going to think of every reason why he would never do that. Like, to me, what he did yesterday during that press conference was proof that, I mean, taking the moral, to think that James Franklin's going to take the moral high ground, I think is ridiculous in and of itself. He used PJ Mustipher as an example, and he kept bringing PJ Mustipher up because PJ Mustipher is out for the season now. But just because one guy, and we're sad to hear that, first of all. I'm sad to hear that PJ Mustipher is one of the better defensive linemen in the Big Ten. But just bringing up anecdotal evidence and saying, well, this proves that we weren't taking dives because PJ Mustipher is out for the season, that means nothing. Like, we don't expect you to be 100% healthy the rest of the game. But, 5 of these 6 injuries were, again, the injury timeouts were on defense. There was no injury timeout for Sean Clifford, so I'm not including that one. Jaquan Brisker, number 1. He went out, came back right away. And by the way, the play where he got hurt was a 20-yard run for Iowa, okay? Devon Elise, number 91, defensive tackle. He went down, left the game, quickly came back. The 2 plays prior to his leaving, 22-yard pass play and a 4-yard run. Number 0, Jonathan Sutherland, did not return. Now, it was preceded by an 11-yard pass play, but again, did not return. I'm not going to act with suspicion towards a guy who left, a good safety who left the game. Number 17, this is the one that got a lot of TV time during the game. Arnold, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Ibikiti. Number 17 went really down. 18-yard run by Tyler Goodson, and then number 17 falls to the ground. And you saw after the game, and Mark, I'm sure you saw it because you watched this game, he goes down, and I don't know if anybody noticed this, and maybe I'm reading into it too much, but you see a Penn State trainer come out and work on the guy's right knee for, 30 seconds, and all of a sudden she starts working on his left knee. I mean, do both knees go out in the same play? And then what do you know? About 30 seconds later, he jumps up and walks off the field. I mean, come on now. That one was ridiculous. And again, it was preceded by an 18-yard run. There was footage that was kind of, I don't know if it was WHO. I know WHO released it, but it may have been from someone else. But anyways, footage of the Iowa sideline when he went down. Iowa special teams coach LeVar Woods got in front of the referee and fell himself, acting, just to just kind of indicate how they felt about the injuries. So I'm not trying to downplay injuries. I think it's sad if fans did boo PJ Mustipher or Jonathan Sutherland or Clifford, but you have to understand that this is a legitimate claim. We'll never know the honest truth. I don't know how you regulate it if you're, the Big Ten or the NCAA. If you say, okay, this guy's got to be out for the rest of the series, the rest of the quarter, I don't know if that's fair. Is it that big of a problem? I do know Kirk Ferentz did state during his media availability this week that he's got someone on staff who used to work for a program whose head coach did this a lot. Now, it's interesting. One of the coaches on Iowa's staff is their recruiting coordinator, who was also on James Franklin's staff at Vanderbilt. Now, again, I'm not necessarily saying that's who he was referring to, but I just don't trust James Franklin. And then you also saw during the game, James Franklin, every time a guy would get hurt, he'd come out, especially number 17, Arnold. He'd come out and he would just stand above Arnold with his arms crossed. No words between the player and the coach. No words, just standing there, almost like returning to the scene of a crime. It was just, it was a little bit too much for me. And I made a comment during the game. I was not on social media during the game. I think everybody, this is not something that Iowa fans, I don't remember ever really making a stink of. I remember 2013, LSU did this after the 2013 season. It was actually 2014 Outback Bowl. I remember that game vividly with C.J. Beathard and Jake Rudock, and there were guys faking injuries in that game, okay? I know Mark D'Antonio has been accused of this as well. Now, you may know more so because of being a Buckeye, but I've heard that about D'Antonio. I don't remember that specifically. But again, I can't say definitively. Nobody can say definitively that there were Penn State guys faking injuries. But again, look at all those guys who went down. 3 of them returned. And on all 3 of those guys who returned, it was preceded by big Iowa plays. And you may say, well, a 4-yard run or a 10-yard pass isn't much. It is in an Iowa-Penn State game. It is for an Iowa offense that struggles. And the other thing, too, Mark, and I know I'm ranting here, but James Franklin brought up how Iowa's they're a huddle team. They don't go tempo. That doesn't mean anything. Like that doesn't mean anything. That's one reason why you may decide not to do it. But let's be honest, when a run game, even at Iowa, they run huddle, when a run game is going and you've got rhythm with that offensive line and with your running back, disrupting that rhythm is big. And we saw it disrupted in this game because every time that seemed to happen, I don't recall Iowa having any big plays after those injury timeouts. So it does affect things. It's not exclusive to teams that run tempo.
So to set the record straight, there were 6 injury timeouts, 5 defense, 1 offense. Okay.
Correct.
For the 5 that were enacted on defense, 2 of those players left the game for the rest of the game. PJ Mustipher, we know, is out for the season. The other one, Sutherland, is a really good player, integral for them, but he left for the game. So then we've got 3 other injuries that appear to be questionable.
Very questionable. Yeah, very questionable. Because they came back quickly too, Mark. They came back quickly.
Okay. The only thing that I can say in terms of number one, I would love to know if there's, again, here we go to compilation of incidents and statistics, would be, does James Franklin have a history of this? I'm not aware of that. I don't know.
I don't know either. Yeah, I really don't.
Number 2, you would have to admit, though, that just in a general college football conversation, when this issue is brought up, the first component of the type play that's going on that typically is there's a response by the defense in doing this is an up-tempo offense that's running so fast to the line of scrimmage, running so many plays that either it's to be able to change out personnel, but now we've got rules in play that allows the defense to change out personnel more readily than we did at one point. So the other one just being the tempo of the game and guys getting gassed. And you still wanting to keep certain personnel groupings and players on the field, I guess, defensively. So that is a go-to component of that type of situation that I can understand James Franklin defending his position.
And it probably happens more often there are probably fan bases where this happens more often when you are constantly running tempo and you get slowed down by injuries. So again, I want to make this clear. I haven't thought about this really deeply. I mean, it happens here and there. You think, oh, that guy really hurt or not. But I really haven't thought this deeply about it since the 2014 Outback Bowl, which is the 2013 season. So, but just to be clear, James Franklin was going to defend himself regardless. So, I agree with you, Mark, that typically that would be a strategy against an up-tempo team. But again, I go back to the fact that I think Penn State knew their offense wasn't going to do nothing with Roberson in the game against that Iowa defense. So they had to figure out any way to keep Iowa's offense from getting any sort of rhythm. So if that meant disrupting the rhythm, even if it wasn't, it's not an up-tempo team, but if we can just disrupt it a little bit, I just think that there's plenty of credence to that theory. Again, I can't say definitively, but I guess we'll never know.
No, we don't know. It reminds me of being a manager at a major company and people calling out sick, and then other management wanting us to conjecture as to whether they're sick or not.
Right.
I always completely refused to do that. Said, I'm not God. I take the sick call, period.
And for the record, Mark, we can talk about this in the media. And again, I want to make it clear. I'm not saying definitively, but Kirk never said definitively either. So people who think, well, they smelled a rat. He said they thought they smelled a rat. He was just stating a fact. That's what the fans obviously felt. He never, ever said that. He did talk about how he's heard that happening, and he's heard that there are terms within coaching staffs where people will call that out and do that as a strategy. But he never actually said that. I know he doesn't like Franklin, though. You can tell he doesn't like James Franklin.
Yeah, so he chose his words in a way in which they could be defended, just as you just did.
Yeah.
But anytime you use that terminology, that's going to poke the bear, and that's going to get under the skin of the opposition.
I love it. I love when Kirk pokes the bear. I loved it when he took the 3 timeouts late in the game. And you did too, Mark. Let's be honest here. When he took the 3 timeouts late last year against PJ Fleck against Minnesota, we love that Kirk here in the state of Iowa, because I think we all wish Kirk behaved a little bit more edgy. And he started to do that these last couple of years. So I love it about him. So I'll leave it at that. And by the way, I said this on the podcast. Let's not try to be, I know James Franklin wasn't there during the whole Joe Pa Sandusky stuff, but of all the schools to try to take a moral high ground, and you're going to do it as a Penn State, come on now. I mean, I get it. They're different staffs, but let's not act like we're holier than thou because we're Penn State University. So,
Yeah. See, if I'm coaching at Penn State, I don't take any type of accountability responsibility for what's happened there in the past.
You're right. But the fan base that has certainly come in droves this week to defend this sort of thing. I don't,
And you alluded to the possible solution for this, and it's really no solution, but it's an attempt at least. And I have somebody has called me or commented at some point in the last couple of weeks, and it wasn't even directed at this situation, that they recommended that there be some type of penalty that yes, you would be held out of a series. Maybe once we get to a certain point, it's the 3rd injury timeout or whatever. And unfortunately, that would then occur even in the place of legitimate injuries. But if we see this too much, I was watching the Ole Miss Arkansas game, and they had a wide shot of the field, one of those deals where you don't normally have a shot on a particular player, and it was a defensive lineman for Ole Miss, and all of a sudden, before the ball gets snapped, he's perfectly fine. All of a sudden, he does one of these, down to the ground, and he's laying down, and one of those deals.
Yeah, that's what happened with the LSU game. I remember, I don't know who it was, but a big lineman did the same exact thing. And I don't know if the trainers must not be in on these things, because they act pretty naive to it. Like, I mentioned the trainer that was treating number 17 starts working on one knee. And that's exactly what happened in against LSU. Start working on one knee and then starts working on the other. So anyways.
You would think that they would be a little
More
sharper than
coordinated.
that, or their instructions would be a little bit sharper than that.
Right.
You know, there's just too many eyes in the skies and too much information out there. If you're going to cheat, you better be cleaner than that.
Cheat smarter than that.
Cheat smarter than that. I say this all the time regarding, and when the John Gruden thing came up and the Urban Meyer things came up this week, and I know I'm going down a different path, but here's the connection. You hope people would do the right thing for the right reason,
Absolutely.
for moral and values reasons. But even if you're not that person, understand as a professional, don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. Even if it's in your heart. And again, I like to believe that people do the right things for the right reasons, for their morals and values and beliefs. But even if you're not that person, protect your reputation and business brand.
And I'll just say this real quick, Mark.
Yep.
Anybody, again, to defend Kirk a little bit, if people didn't like, Penn State fans especially didn't like that Kirk said that, that's okay. I mean, whatever. But let's just be honest. And I'm not saying Kirk is holier than thou. There were some allegations against Kirk last summer. But I think most people in the Big Ten, most people who don't have a vendetta against Kirk, whether you're a Hawkeye fan or not, realize that Kirk does do things the right way. I've never, ever heard anybody question whether he's committing recruiting violations or whether he's telling his players to fake injuries. I can't imagine that. Maybe I'm brainwashed and I'm seeing things through rosy-colored glasses. I don't know, but I do appreciate that about Kirk. And when I see it, again, my spidey sense went off during the game Saturday. That's why I do get sort of emotional or frustrated about it, because I don't think it's within the realms of college football, and it's not fair to the kids who are working hard to perform if they're being disrupted by something that, again, is beyond what we should be seeing.
Yeah. I didn't lock in on that situation. One of the disadvantages of trying to watch like 3 or 4 games at the same time.
Right.
All right. We got Corey Braddock here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. And of course, he anchors our coverage at the Voice of College Football on the Iowa channel. So right now we are simulcasting on the Big Ten channel, the Iowa channel, which I appreciate, and I believe Corey does as well, that we are building and growing, and we're well over 500 subs right now. So if you have yet to subscribe, please do there. Also do it from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Just put that in your search bar right here on YouTube, from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Well, Corey, let's get to this Purdue matchup, because as you had mentioned, there is some hesitancy there, some trepidation about just the track record recently, not necessarily this Purdue team, although it's a pretty competent team. They're playing with some decent teams. They went to Notre Dame. It was a 1-score game midway through the fourth quarter before they lost by 2 touchdowns. They led Minnesota, lost that one in the fourth quarter, 20-13. They've had a decent season, beat an Oregon State team at home. And so we've got Purdue traveling to Iowa, and of course, a possible letdown factor after the big win against Penn State.
Absolutely, Mark. And I'm sorry. Can you post this comment from Mozart's Ghost? I love this comment, first of all. And then I promise I'm gonna answer your question. But this comment from Mozart's Ghost deserves to get the limelight for a moment.
Okay, go to it. Your answer.
Well, no, this it's just a comment.
Oh, you're not talking about the one that I've posted. Okay.
No, sorry. If he's had more than one comment, he's kind of ripping me here, but I figure it's worth.
Sure.
It's worth talking about. So Mozart's Ghost says, he's quoting me, "I want to move on for this," and then goes off for 10 straight minutes. So yes, that's true. I did say I wanted to move on after the Penn State discussion. I did go off for 10 minutes. So I apologize for that. As it relates to your question, Mark, there it is. I like it. As it relates to your question, Mark, about Purdue. Yeah, Braum has had Kirk's, he's had Kirk's number. I mean, I think back to I believe it was 2017. And we talked about this preseason, I remember, on one of your shows, Mark, but Purdue attacked the same cornerback play after play after play. I believe he threw, and I can't remember the big Purdue receiver. I always forget his name.
I'll find it. The one now is David Bell, but back
Yeah.
in 2017.
2017, yeah, weird name. But anyways, they threw to him, I want to say 3 or 4 straight plays, and I believe Iowa subbed in like 3 or 4 different cornerbacks during that stretch. And I believe trying to think 2017, one of them would have been Josh Jackson. I think he was probably the last resort because he was the best corner that year. Ojemudia was one of the guys they subbed on him, and I'll probably think of his name here in a moment if you don't. But did you find it, Mark?
Anthony
Mahungu.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, you got it.
I vaguely remember him. 7 catches for $135 and 2 touchdowns.
That's what Brom does. He attacks a weak spot in Iowa's secondary. 2018. Again, I have a hard time sometimes keeping these games, which one was which, because 17 was played in Kinnick. 18, well, I believe was the same thing. That would have been the really short quarterback, David Blau.
Yeah.
That was burning Iowa time after time after time. They do it every year. And then I think of course, these last 2 matchups with David Bell, he's had 13 catches in each of the last 2 matchups. He got 26 catches in 2 matchups against Iowa. I believe both times at least 120 yards apiece. So he's been a mismatch. Now, keep in mind, if you're an Iowa fan, there are ample reasons to not panic about this because, for one, Iowa did not have Jack Campbell, and they did not have Seth Benson at linebacker during the game last year. So that's a huge factor. In fact, I was undefeated since they got Jack Campbell back from mono last year. So, I think Iowa will be okay. Cornerback is a concern now because you lost Riley Moss to injury during that Penn State game. We're talking about injuries, and we're not talking about the biggest one for Iowa, and that is the loss of Riley Moss. He came down off an interception, looked like he was fine, got back up, started running off, and then went down. Looked like a non-contact. Kirk did clarify that this week and said it did happen during the play. Of course, when you put some weight on the knee afterwards, sometimes that's when you realize you're hurt. So he'll be down. Terry Roberts is in at corner. That's good news because Terry is a guy who Kirk obviously has a lot of confidence in. In fact, he's stated that he views Terry Roberts as a starter. Terry has been a superstar. Superstar on special teams as far as a gunner. Him and Ivory Kelly-Martin. We haven't talked about punting, Mark, but man, Tory Taylor in that gunning unit for Iowa special teams is just insane. They really are. And here's a kid that didn't really know how to do the traditional punt last year. A lot of rugby kicks. Man, he's learned it. And so, it's going to be interesting to see how Terry holds up in, being an every down type kid. I also wonder, and I brought this up during the podcast, I wonder how Iowa is going to handle situations where they do have to play, I don't want to say a nickel, but a dime defense where you have to send another defensive back on the field. Iowa doesn't do it a lot because they have confidence in Dane Belton, and then you deploy another linebacker in addition to Belton. But when you do have to, because they were playing some dime with Moss, Terry Roberts, and Hankins at times leading up to this game. So will they abandon that? Certainly Purdue's a team where you probably don't want to abandon that because they've got a guy in right at wide receiver 00 who can certainly take the top off. David Bell is more than capable. So I just wonder do they have confidence in Jamari Harris, the next corner who would presumably be in. So as we see seemingly every year, corner depth might start to be a question. You hope it doesn't. If you're Iowa, you hope Roberts and Hankins needs to stay healthy. He might be the most important player right now on defense as far as health. So all those things are a question. The defensive line, I thought, underperformed last week against Penn State. Iowa didn't get a whole lot of pressure even on Roberson until late in the game. So I think they'll take a step forward this week. I'd have a hard time seeing them struggle because they've been great this year as far as exceeding expectations. So there's lots of things to follow in this game. O'Connell, who I think is going to be the starter on Saturday. He's the guy who beat Iowa last year. So, Xander Horvath at running back for Purdue is out. I think. I haven't heard anything differently. Mark, have you about his health?
That's what I've heard. Yes.
So if he's out, he ran through Iowa last year, again, without Jack Campbell and Seth Benson, but he was a big factor in that game. Iowa they were killed with penalties in that game. They were killed with 2 fumbles from Sargent and Goodson in that game. I think Iowa wins this game, but you cannot look past this game. And in no way do I think players or coaches are looking past them. I guess if fans want to, they can, but I don't think you should, because again, Kirk is 1-3 against Jeff Brom at Purdue. And Brom has a tendency to attack weak spots in Iowa's secondary. The one thing that Brom has not done this year is he doesn't seem to be as high-powered on offense, Mark. I know he said preseason he was going to focus more on the defense. I think that was this past offseason. I guess they were running together, but I wonder if that's affected the offense at all, because they're not scoring as many points as they typically do, although Bell is still putting up all Big Ten numbers. So any observations from you, Mark, anything that you're concerned about or you should be concerned about if you're an Iowa guy?
So in my limited viewing of Purdue football, which would be about a quarter to a half against Notre Dame, I watched the fourth quarter against Oregon State. That went from a defensive struggle to a back and forth, shot for shot, big play fourth quarter in which Purdue was 1 to 2 scores ahead, kind of fending off an Oregon State rally. I was much more impressed with Aiden O'Connell, and that was at a point in which Jack Plummer was the starter. And I wondered why O'Connell wasn't the starter. He looked better to me against Oregon State and against Notre Dame. And finally, they did make that switch after he led in a quagmire of a game against Illinois. And we brought up the Illini. That was the one team, Purdue, that played down to their level. And that was like a 6-6 game, or they were down 9-6 in the fourth quarter. And O'Connell came in, put together a drive, and ran for a touchdown. And he provides, I think he can throw it just as well as Plummer myself. And he provides more, I think, on offense. Anyway, so they score late. They beat Illinois. So I think, based, again, I'm not in practice or anything or watching every game, but that they made the right quarterback selection there. I watched the cut down version of the Minnesota game. That was a game that was a close one in which Minnesota came back for the first time in the PJ Fleck era, by the way, that they had trailed at halftime and won a football game. Not that they had to make some amazing comeback, but they were down by 3 at half. So Purdue lost that game to Minnesota. But yeah, other than that, nothing really stands out. Just during the Jeff Brom era, of course, he takes over. He's an offensive guy, a quarterback guy, a guru of sorts. He takes over a program, and they immediately get better on defense, is what led to that initial resurgence of Purdue football. They went 7-5 that first year, won a bowl game against, I believe they went 6-6, won the bowl game against Arizona 7-6, but it was the defense actually that played better than the offense. And they had a defensive regression after that. And they've played better on that side of the ball this year. So, yeah, I was scurrying to find the Vegas line on this game. I would guess it's 10
I think it's
or
Iowa
11.
by 11.
Okay. That's
Something like that.
I know I looked it up at one point this week for our spreadsheet of predictions. So that's what, something in that range. So that seems pretty fair.
Yeah, O'Connell knows how to get the ball to Bell. That's the biggest thing. If you're Purdue, you're not going to win unless Bell can have a big day. I mean, he could go for 13. I mean, they went for 13. He went for 13 catches in 2019 and 130 yards against Iowa, and they lost in Kinnick. And that was a game I was at. It's weird how their offense works, because they are so dynamic, or they can be so dynamic. But man, it doesn't take much for their offense to sort of sputter. So yeah, there are concerns certainly with this game. There's no reason to look past them. Again, I think Iowa's going to shut down that run because Iowa's defense is just, again, with those linebackers we talked about, the line improving. I don't see them being able to run, especially without a bruiser like Horvath. So it'll be interesting to see if Iowa can bait them into interceptions. Last year, I remember a couple plays. I mean, I think Bell had like 2 or 3 touchdowns against Iowa last year. He kind of picked apart the Iowa zone. If they had played later in the year, I certainly would have picked Iowa. I probably would have picked Iowa to win 8 or 9 times out of 10 against Purdue last year. Just given what Iowa ended up doing and where Purdue went. But it should be a up and down game, because Purdue's defense, although it is improved. I saw a comment in the chat. It is an improved defense. And you're right, Mark. when Braun first got there, they were all about defense, and that was kind of their resurgence. And he was a hot commodity. Everybody thought he was going to go to Louisville, and he stays at Purdue. But they've kind of it's been weird. They were really good on defense, not great on offense, and they were really good on offense, not great on defense. I don't know where they are this year. They kind of switched things again. People got to remember, though, they are number 2 in the Big Ten West right now. If you just look at the standings, they're tied for second. So if you're a Boilermaker fan, you are not discounting the idea that maybe you can win the West still. I mean, mathematically, it's certainly within the realm of possibilities. You beat Iowa on the road. You're the hottest story in college football on Saturday. So, again, I think Iowa will be locked in. I don't think the Penn State nonsense, which I promise I am officially moved on now. I'm tired of talking about it. I don't think that will affect the players at all. I don't think they probably read into it at all this week. I just can't imagine that would be a distraction for them. And they get a bye week the following week. So you win this game, you get a bye before Wisconsin, which is a good time to heal up. You hope you get Riley Moss back for that Wisconsin game. But the bottom line is this season is turning out to be a special season, or at least heading in that direction, primarily because obviously the defense and special teams, but Iowa has stayed healthy all year long. And this is the first hurdle, the first real hurdle they've had to jump as far as injuries. And that's the injury of Riley Moss. We saw Ethan Hurkett, who got some play on the defensive line, go down. I don't even know his status. But besides Hurkett, I'm trying to think of other major injuries for this team. They really haven't had any. So that will be my biggest storyline heading into this game. And it almost is fitting because, again, that's the position that it tends to come down to for Iowa and Purdue, cornerback.
So we do tend to get caught up in rankings and overall records, but keep in mind for the division race, of course, if Iowa would lose this game, they lose control of the division. Now, no one expects Purdue to go on some kind of major run and finish 8-1 in the Big Ten. But still, those are the facts that if they would drop one here to Purdue, that the Boilers would be in charge of the division.
Mark, who's the biggest?
Technically, Minnesota would if they take care of business against Nebraska. Who's
the biggest threat right now in the West to Iowa? If you just looked at, and I mean, I'm asking you to project forward. I know I completely see where you're coming from looking at resume, but who's the biggest threat moving forward to Iowa in your opinion?
Wisconsin. On the field, Wisconsin, in regards to putting together a season that could challenge them and knock them out of the Big Ten championship game. Of course, Wisconsin's got the 2 losses in conference, so that's a reach. They've got.
That's why I'm trying to weigh those 2 losses for Wisconsin, who I think is probably a better team, against the 1 loss for Minnesota and Purdue. I just have a hard time seeing who could. I mean, not that they can't, but who's going to catch Iowa?
Yeah, I agree, because Wisconsin, to me, on the field is the bigger threat, but that only gets them 1 game closer.
Right.
Whereas obviously Minnesota and Purdue, and there's a lot of football for them to play against what are probably more talented opponents.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. This is an opportunity for Iowa to move closer and closer to the season they want to have. If you want to have any chance of winning the playoff or making the playoff, you probably could theoretically lose this game and then win out and beat Ohio State in the championship and probably get in. But boy, loss at home against an average Purdue team, what we think to be an average Purdue team, that's not good. So can't look past it. And I just don't see any reason with a bye week next week that Iowa players would be looking past a team that's beaten Iowa 3 of the last 4 meetings.
Yeah, this would not be the game to lose. Certainly Ohio State can attest to that. They had 2, quote unquote, this may be offensive to some people in the chat, bad losses that knocked them out of playoff spots in 2017 and 18, 1 to Iowa, 1 to Purdue. Certainly the loss to Purdue was much more egregious as a 7-loss team versus Iowa went, I believe, 8-5 that year.
Yeah, that's. I want to bring this up, Mark. I know you're probably trying to wind these things down, but I know we probably don't have a lot of time to get into this. Iowa did grab a running back recruit.
Oh yeah.
This week, I guess we can maybe touch on that if that's okay with you, Mark.
Absolutely.
Briefly, Caleb Johnson out of, I believe he's out of Hamilton, Ohio. 6'1", kind of a bigger back, 215 as far as what he's listing according to 247. Kind of a bigger guy at running back, and he's a guy. If you watch his film, he kind of fits that Liddell Betts mold. I talked about that in the podcast today. Jazzy and Patterson, the kid out of Florida that Iowa grabbed a few weeks ago, and now this kid, Caleb Johnson, they both are kind of similar. I think Jazzy looks like he's got more upside, more explosiveness, better pass catcher, route runner. But guys who are kind of just complete backs, I compared them to sort of like a Mekhi Sargent, only bigger. Guys who are hard to bring down, decent speed, but just all-around backs. Whereas you look kind of what Kirk Ferentz has tried to do, at least in my estimation, prior to the Liddell era, and maybe they'll continue to do this moving forward in recruiting. But you have a lot of guys who, you have that lightning thunder combination you're trying to grab. With 2015, you had, and even 16, you had Akram Wadley and LaShawn Daniels. You got lightning and thunder. You've got, obviously, Goodson has kind of broken that mold, thankfully, as well. But we've just seen that over the years. It's either one or the other. And I think these guys that Iowa's starting to recruit harder and actually having success. I mean, this is a kid who flipped from California to Iowa here. I think that's going to pay dividends. And Liddell Betts obviously would know what it takes to run successfully at the Big Ten level. Here's a guy who had a pretty bad offensive line. And boy, he found ways to rack up yardage at Iowa and, of course, with the Redskins moving forward. So good win for Iowa on the recruiting trail. I always try to – I don't talk about recruiting as much as some people maybe would like me to, because we're so limited with tape and film. And I don't like it when people look at film and they make these grandiose comparisons and these estimations based on highlight films on Huddle. It just doesn't make any sense to do that. But again, you look at the offer list: Iowa State, Cal, Cincinnati, Kentucky, Michigan State, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, West Virginia. Obviously some significant interest there, including interest from, Power 5 teams, Big Ten teams. So good win for Iowa. That's another win from the Penn State win on Saturday. Iowa had like 80 recruits at that game. It was ridiculous. Obviously the big storyline, I don't think you and I have ever talked about it, Mark, which is kind of shameful on my part, but Caden Proctor and Xavier Nwamka, those are two of the top recruits in the country. Nwamka being a safety, who's the number one recruit in the country. Both those guys were at this game on Saturday. So you got to think they were impressed by the crowd, because, man, even Don Patterson said after that game, it was Don was there for 1985, Michigan, Iowa. Of course, he was a coach, so he was down the field, but he doesn't recall a time where that crowd was louder than they were on Saturday. Of course, it paid dividends, 8 false starts for Roberson and that Penn State offense. So you got to think the recruits that were there were impressed. Hopefully, Caleb Johnson's just the start of another nice stretch for recruiting, because let's remember, but prior to the offseason controversy last summer for Iowa's, what would that be, 2021 class, this class that we're in right now, was pretty impressive. I mean, as far as rankings, it ranked a lot higher than most Iowa recruiting classes. And then, of course, the offseason trouble and people were kind of questioning where it would end up. And they only, I think, had one kid from Florida, cornerback, that decommitted, as I recall. I may have that wrong, but it really didn't affect him too much. And, a couple nice grabs here early for skill position players is always a win if you're an Iowa Hawkeye.
Caleb Johnson at 6'1", 215 out of Hamilton, Ohio, as Corey had stated, 40th rated running back in the country, according to the 247 Sports Composite, 17th rated player in the Buckeye State, number 534 overall. Wanted to make sure that we recognized a couple contributions here coming in from our Clemson guy. So this is a Clemson fan, Corey. BGPO Football Funk. Let's go Hawkeyes. I don't know where that's coming from, but certainly I don't know if he possibly has a vendetta against Purdue or just wants Iowa to shake things up in the Big Ten, possibly.
Appreciate that. I appreciate that coming from a Clemson fan, because I know this is not the typical year for Clemson fans. So appreciate that. And any little bit does help for the Iowa channel. So appreciate any contribution.
Thank you so much for that, DeAndre. And big Irish balls.
Glad you could say it, not me, Mark.
I read all super chats, super stickers in this case.
Yes,
Had nothing to say, but his mantra there and handle said it all. So,
Mark, I just want to
throw the super sticker.
Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate that from I'll just call him Bib, B-I-B. Appreciate the contribution there. I just want to make a comment here, and I'm going to bring this up again during our post-game Saturday, if I remember it. I meant to bring it up this past weekend. But I would like to get a feeler, and if people, Iowa fans who are listening now, are interested in this, if you're enjoying the post-game shows with Don Patterson, would like to get a feeler for Iowa fans, if you would like a similar type post-game show during basketball season. Of course, that will not be on the Voice of College Football channel. That would be on my channel, From the Hawkeye of the Storm. If you would enjoy that, if you're an Iowa Hawkeye basketball fan as well, please give us your feedback. I mean, whatever videos, whether it be here in the live chat or one of my videos From the Hawkeye of the Storm or Iowa at the Voice of College Football, please give some feedback so we can get kind of a feel as if that would, just to see if that would be successful, because we're considering that, but final decision has not been made yet. So please give us your reaction to that idea of having a post-game show for basketball this year.
Absolutely. And again, keep in mind, hopefully most of you already know that Corey and Coach Don Patterson break down the Hawkeyes each and every game post-game. So join them after Purdue and Iowa conclude right here at the Voice of College Football on the Iowa channel. Typically, it's simulcasted elsewhere, but we will figure that out. I have yet to look at the entire grid and spreadsheet of all our offerings of post-game shows across the Voice of College Football, but certainly it will be on the Iowa channel. And again, there are two basic reasons you would get over there and subscribe. Number one, the content is amazing. Corey posts videos on a consistent basis over there, in addition to his work from the Hawkeye of the Storm. So please subscribe at both destinations, from the Hawkeye of the Storm and over on the Iowa channel here at the Voice of College Football. Also, if you just want to support what we do here at the Voice of College Football, please subscribe to any channel that has yet to reach 1,000 subs. And the Iowa channel's gaining steam. We appreciate that. Thank you so much. But if you would like to subscribe there, and then even if you want to unsubscribe at some point, when we are safely above 1,000 subs, please do. Please feel free to do that. But you would help us build and grow the channels by subbing to any of the channels under 1,000 subs, specifically the Iowa channel. So thank you so much for that. All right, Corey, Purdue and Iowa, you have yet to make a prediction?
Yeah, I'm going to leave that for my I think I gave that away on my show today that I'm picking Iowa. I do think Iowa will win the game, but as far as the final score, I'm trying to learn from I'm going to say late and great. I'm going to kill you yet, Mark, but the great Mark Rogers. If you want to catch my pick, my score, head over to From the Hawkeye of the Storm late Friday night when I release my weekly picks, and you'll get a score prediction for the game Saturday.
We have also roped Corey into selecting a 12-pack of games along with about 20 media members over on Patreon. So that's only 17 cents per day, $5 per month on Patreon. That you get the selections of about 20 media members, some of your favorite guests, analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including myself. And then I also tack on quite a bit more than that. I select the entire top 25, 10-6 against the spread last week, running about 58% for the season, about in the high 70 percentile straight up. So check it out there. All right,
numbers,
Corey.
Mark. Winning numbers.
Decent.
For anybody that's worth
numbers.
signing up for Patreon. Absolutely.
There you go. Well, Corey, it's been fun, and we hope to do this each and every week, folks. Talk Iowa football for a complete hour here at the Voice of College Football, and we believe this is our time and day destination, but keep it locked in. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we are going live. Corey, we appreciate it. Enjoy the game. Have a great post game as well.
Yep, absolutely. Enjoy some football this weekend, Mark. We'll talk to you soon.
I'm going to show up late tonight to take some calls. So roughly 11:30 p.m. Eastern time, right here at the Voice of College Football. 11:30 tonight. I'll take your calls. We'll talk college football leading into the big Friday game, Syracuse-Clemson. We also have Oregon and Cal playing on Friday night, and we'll take it on into Saturday and preview a big week 7. We'll see you in a few hours.